about 10 o'clock, Lady Margaret, my bride, shall see. Lady Margaret was standing in her own hall door, a-combing back her hair, when who did she spy but sweet William and his bride, as they to the church drew nigh. She threw away her ivory comb, in silk bound up her hair. She stepped out of her own hall door, never to return hath there. The day being gone and night coming on, when most all men were asleep, sweet William espied Lady Margaret's ghost, standing at his bride's feet. "Oh, how do you like your bed?" she said. "Oh, how do you like your sheet? How do you like that pretty fair girl who's lying in your arms asleep?" Very well, I like my bed. Much better I like my sheet, but best of all is that pretty fair girl who's standing at my bride's feet. The night being gone and day coming on, when most all men were awake, sweet William said he was pestered in his head by a dream he dreamt last night. Such dreams, and do not like. Such dreams, they are not good. I dreamed that my hall was filled with wild swine, and my bride was a-swimming in blood. He called round him his merry men all. He numbered them 1, 2, 3. He asked the leave of his own dear wife, if Lady Margaret he might go and see. "Go and see Lady Margaret now. Go and welcome her for me, for I know you love Lady Margaret much better than ever you did love me." Sweet William rode up to Lady Margaret's gate. He tingled so loud at the ring, there's none so ready as Margaret's 7th brother to rise and let him come in. "Is Lady Margaret in her kitchen?" he said, "or is she in her hall? Or is she in her own dwelling room amongst the ladies all?" "She's neither in her kitchen," said he, "nor is she in her hall. Yonder she lies in a cold coffin that sits by the side of the wall. Unfold, unfold those holland sheets, you're made of linen so fine. Let me kiss once more those cold clay lips that oft have kissed mine. Unfold, unfold those holland sheets that are made of linen so fine. Tonight they shall hang over Lady Margaret's corpse, and tomorrow shall hang over mine. 3 times he kissed those cherry, cherry lips. 3 times he kissed her chin, and then he kissed her cold clay lips that pierced his heart within. Lady Margaret, she died on yesterday, and I shall die tomorrow. Lady Margaret, she died of pure love's sake, and I shall die for sorrow. Lady Margaret was buried in the new churchyard. Sweet William was placed close by her, and out of her grave grew a blood-red rose, and out of his a green briar. They grew and they grew to the high church top. They could not grow any higher. There they tangled and tied into a bow knot for all true lovers to admire. Fair Margaret and Sweet William, or Sweet William and Lady Margaret, depending on whose title you use. One of the quintessential British ballads, Appalachian ballads, has that wonderful eternal symbol of the rose and the briar that actually comes from an older ballad. Lord Lovell worked its way into this, and then of course worked its way into other ballads like Barbara Allen, and is still referred to in country songs. You still hear things about the rose and the briar. Well, here's where it came from. Well, let's go back to the PowerPoint. Most of the ballads that Jackson heard, of course, were sung unaccompanied. She did hear one accompanied by dulcimer. Most of the ones Sharp heard were unaccompanied. He did hear one accompanied by banjo. But at the time that she collected, people were mostly singing these unaccompanied. Well, Lizaine Napier toted Katherine Jackson around the mountains of East Kentucky for about a fortnight, and took her to sewing bees, to meet women in their homes, to public events like funerals. And by the time this and a few subsequent collecting trips were done, Jackson had collected over 60 ballads with different variants, different versions of each ballad. When the time came for this trip to be over, apparently Lizaine and Katherine had developed somewhat of a friendship, although there's no record that they kept it up. I couldn't find any correspondence or anything like that. I didn't find any record of Katherine going back to visit, but what's interesting to me is that when Katherine Jackson left the mountains and Lizaine Napier said goodbye, here, I'll wave my arm, we'll get some light back. Although it was very dramatic how it came down in the middle of the song, didn't you think? When Katherine Jackson left, Lizaine Napier sang a song of farewell, the true lover's farewell. And she sang a verse that I haven't found anyplace else. So I wonder if this verse was Lizaine's gift to Katherine Jackson. And I'm not going to sing the whole song because it's rather long, but I'll sing you a couple verses and I'll point out that verse. Yeah, this is the high key. Let's see if my allergies will let me do it. The time draws near, my dearest dear, when you and I must part. But little do you know the grief of my poor broken heart. Lord, send that I might go with you, or you might tarry here. Your company is so charming, love, so charming to me. Here's the verse. It makes me think when you are away that a day is 3 and an hour is 10. It makes me weep when I might sleep and say I've lost a friend. So fare you well, my own true love. So fare you well for a while. For I'm going away, but I'm coming back again, although it be 10,000 miles. True Lover's Farewell. I've never found that verse anyplace else. Maybe somebody has. If you have, please tell me when it's over, because I'd love to know if in fact she did make that up for the occasion. I was, of course, playing dulcimer with that. When you enter the state of Kentucky, they say, you know, welcome Kentucky, here's your dulcimer. True Lover's Farewell. All right. Well, now what do you do when you've collected 60 ballads and you're an academic? Well, of course, you try to publish. Katherine Jackson knew, given the mores of the time, that she needed the backing of a powerful man, given the gender and the social structures of the day. Olive Dame Campbell did this 7 years later, when she sought the help of one Cecil Sharp. So Katherine Jackson tried to do the same thing. She went to Berea College because, of course, she knew about Berea College. She grew up not too far from there. She actually visited it when she was a child. So she thought she would seek the help of Berea College's president and definer of all things Appalachian, William Goodall Frost. Frost initially agreed to help her publish, but that publication did not happen. Why does this matter? Well, once again, had Jackson published this collection in 1910, really in 1911, as intended, it would have been the first large scholarly collection of Appalachian balladry ever published. But instead, several things colluded to destroy her dreams of publication. So while this collection was not being published, others like Hubert Sheeran and Cecil Sharp in particular went on to claim the mantle of Appalachian ballad expert. Sharp published English folk songs from the Southern Appalachians in 1917, and he became thought of as the singular expert on the subject. And his material and his theories about Appalachian balladry became unquestioned truth, and it is still regarded by many as such down to this day. So let's return to those two questions that I mentioned at the beginning. Why was Jackson never able to get her collection published? And if she had published, and published before Sharp, would it have made any difference? Was her collection any different than Sharp's? Let's take the second one first. Was it any different? Yes. In the first place, Katherine Jackson really highlighted the role of women as the keepers of the ballads. When Jackson went collecting, almost all of the people who sang for her were women. Now, the fact is that 2/3 of Cecil Sharp's informants were also women. Nowhere in his 23-page introduction does he mention that fact. In fact, when he talks about ballad singers, he always uses the male pronoun. When the ballad singer sings, he closes his eyes, he has no affectation, he does this, he does that. Now, the fact is, according to the speech patterns of the time, if you had mixed genders and you used the impersonal pronoun, you always defaulted to he. So it's understandable that he did that. But nevertheless, the picture that we get of the ballad singer from Sharp's introduction is a male one. It's the men who are singing them. It's the men keeping them alive. It's the men who have the agency regarding the practice of this art form. Jackson, on the other hand, highlighted the role of women. As I said, almost all of her sources were women. She stressed that women, not men, were the keepers of the ballads. Now, someone had said this about 5 years before she did, and that was Emma Bell Miles, who in an article for the Journal of American Folklore and later in Spirit of the Mountains, talked at great length about the fact that the men sang other things, but the women were singing the ballads. Miles did not get a lot of mileage, pardon the pun, with her written work. But had Jackson gotten some mileage from her written work, we might have heard that a little bit earlier. Jackson actually dedicated her collection to the singing mothers of colonial America. She said, "To the women of the community is credit for the preservation of the ballads due." She also described some differences in the way that the ballads were sung. First of all, she said it was a communal affair. Women sang these when they got together. They sang these long ballads from beginning to end. They certainly sang the refrains together. They sang them at quilting bees and sewing bees. They sang them in groups. It was not just one guy out with his mule plowing the field. Women sang them when they got together. She also mentioned that they would rock back and forth, almost like they were dovening. And she also said that their faces were expressive of the stanzas sung. So those are already a few key differences between her work and Sharp's. There were also some musical differences that I think are important. The first one is that we have this image of Appalachian music as being in duple meter, as being in 4 or being in 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Why do we get that idea? Well, we get it because of fiddle tunes that got recorded during the Big Bang of country music. We get it because of the Carter family. We get it because of the prevalence of bluegrass and its influence on what developed into later kinds of country music. The majority of the stuff was in 4. It was in duple, 1, 2, 1, 2, or 1, 2, 3, 4. Jackson's collection was not. It was mostly in triple meter. Sharp's was mostly in duple meter. So you could actually argue that this kind of stereotype of the 4/4ing of Appalachian music goes all the way back to Sharp. But Jackson's collection had more ballads in triple meter than in duple, meaning 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'll give you one of those real quick. Chord banjo. This is what the banjos usually looked like at the very beginning. We know that in the early 1800s, thanks to Phil Jameson's book, that they were playing gourd banjos at dances. So I'll give you just a verse or two of this in the interest of time. This is Lord Randall. The motto is always check your food out before you eat it. Here we go. Oh, where have you been to, Lord Randall, my son? Oh, where have you been to, my sweet pretty one? Over high hills and mountains, mother, make my bed soon, for I'm sick to the heart and I wanna lie down. What did you eat for your supper, Lord Randall, my son? What did you eat for your supper, my sweet pretty one? Fried eels and fresh butter, mother, make my bed soon, for I'm sick to the heart and I wanna lie down. 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You hear that? Okay, so that was one difference. She had more ballads in triple meter than in duple meter. And here's a difference that I lectured for a group in England. They really didn't want to hear this one. The fact is this, Cecil Sharp had some funny ideas about Appalachian music. And one of them was this. He was sort of fixated on the idea that Appalachian ballads were mostly gapped scale ballads, and particularly they used the pentatonic scale. Okay, so what's the difference between like a major scale and a pentatonic scale? All right, let me walk you through that real quick. We all know the major scale. It's what we all sang in Do-a-deer when we were kids, right? Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. We put numbers on it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 1 again, right? So sing that with me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. Now we're going to leave out 4 and 7. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 1. That's the pentatonic scale. Cecil Sharp went on a long riff in his introduction about how the pentatonic scale was obviously an older scale, and obviously showed that these were Elizabethan Englishmen who came over and sang these melodies absolutely unchanged for hundreds of years. And this helped to prove that these, that they had just totally preserved the culture entirely intact and nothing had ever changed. Okay, first of all, hogwash. The pentatonic scale is probably the most widely used scale in the world in folk music. It's used in China, it's used in Hungary, it's used in Korea. Ari-rang, ari-rang, ari-rang. It's used all over the world, so it doesn't prove British anything. It also doesn't prove older anything. The major scale was in use in Europe by the 1100s across a broad spectrum of music, dance music, vocal music, church music. It was being used. Guido d'Arezzo wrote about it. And so the idea that somehow the major scale was not being used is just not accurate. It is just not accurate. So Sharp's collection was mostly a pentatonic collection. By far, I think it was something like 39% of his songs, I can't remember the exact number, were in the pentatonic mode. I might point out that 60 of those songs came from Jane Hicks Gentry, the wonderful singer from North Carolina. And if you take those out of the equation, then the numbers are a lot more even. But let's let that go for a minute. Jackson's collection, on the other hand, had a lot more ballads in major keys. In fact, the majority of her ballads were in major keys. So here's a quick sample of that. The first came in were lily white, and the next were pink and blue. The next came in Lord Vander's wife, the flower of the view. Now this my grove I be in by, fair as the morning sun. She looked at him and he looked at her, the likes was never known. 11788. The first came in 1176 432 1725. The entire major scale in the first phrase. So Jackson had a different makeup of her ballads as far as the music was concerned. She really focused on the role of women in a way that Cecil Sharp did not. And both of those, I think, are significant. What's kind of interesting to me is that Cecil Sharp was fixated on this idea that the pentatonic scale proved that somehow it was English. In fact, if it proved anything, it proved the opposite. It proved influence from some of their neighbors who used other scales, pentatonic scales, people who maybe originally came from, say, West Africa, people who were Southeastern Native Americans, people who Cecil Sharp was not interested in because they didn't fit his theory, you know. And he ran across plenty of African Americans. He never asked them to sing for him, except for one woman who was a mixed race woman who was a laundry woman working for one of his subjects. But he was not interested in the music of African Americans. If he had been, he might have asked that question, why are they using that scale? He might have asked the question, why are these melodies different than the ones in Britain, instead of just assuming it meant that they were older. He might have even looked in New England, where he was spending most of his time until he went into Southern Appalachia, and gone around and heard some of the songs there and realized that they were not using the pentatonic scale in the North, so why were they using it in the Southern Appalachians? He might have asked those questions. He did not. And so we have a theory about Appalachian music that has been put forward to this day that I think is full of holes. And like I said, they weren't too keen about that when I said that to the people in England. Anyway, okay, moving along. Let's put the guitar down. We get to the other question now. Why was it not published? Why was it not published? Well, there were a whole bunch of reasons, and that's the heart of the book. I hope you buy the book. I hope you read the book. I can't do it justice in so short a time. What I will tell you is that there was this really intriguing mix of professional jealousies and broken promises and outright theft. And they were all part and parcel of what Scott Spencer has termed the Ballad Wars of the early 20th century, where collectors were kind of elbowing each other out of the way, trying to lay claim to these old songs. In brief, there were things that happened. Jackson allowed access to her ballads prematurely to a couple of people, and that was not wise. Frost dragged his feet, and part of the reason, I think, is because there were ballad collectors on the Berea campus, James Watt Rain among them, and he was afraid of jealousies. Frost himself had a waxing and waning interest in balladry, and he was on the road half of the year, just trying to keep the college going. He was also dealing with the day law and the fallout from that. He suffered to what were politely termed cases of nervous exhaustion and had to be institutionalized. So Jackson's ballads got lost in the shuffle. Other people did work while this was not being published, like Sheeran and Sharp, and also a fellow named William Aspinwall Bradley, who was writing articles for Harper's. And I have to also say that I think gender biases allowed powerful men to treat Jackson in ways that they would not have with male colleagues. For example, Frost allowed William Aspinwall Bradley access to her collection, probably thinking that, this would be publicity, and it would be good publicity for Berea, and it would be good publicity for Jackson, but he didn't ask her. And that's a big no-no in academia. Similarly, James Watt Rain apparently helped himself to her collection because he had copies of her work in his collection credited. And finally, there were other people in the ballad world like Sheeran and Combs and Catherine Pettit, who were connected to what was then the center of ballad academia, Harvard University, and the dark prince of publication, George Lyman Kittredge, whose influence was law when it came to the Journal of American Folklore. And many others were connected to him and to the journal, and Jackson did not work to her advantage. And finally, she got married, she became a mother, and her attention was split, to say the least. Would it have made a difference? Yes and no. In brief, Jackson's highlighting of the role of women as ballad singers, as well as the particular repertoire gathered, was different, and that would have at least contributed to our early view of balladry. But the fact is, Cecil Sharp had a huge reputation, and he was male, and I think it's likely he would have outshone her, but she would have at least been part of that early dialogue, and the material would have been out there, and other people might have come back to it before me, and it might have been part of the discussion. So yes and no. So what's the end of this story? Well, it didn't get published, and then more years passed and it didn't get published. And then a woman named Elizabeth Peck became the college historian at Berea College. She went into the mountain room where she says all things are kept. And she said she found a package tied in tough knots with a note on it saying, K. Jackson, hold, in the handwriting of William Goodall Frost, whom I knew so well. The year was 1954. Jackson's collection had sat there on that shelf for 43 years. The story has a somewhat happy ending. Gladys Jameson and Elizabeth I just lost her name and I just said it, Elizabeth Peck, contacted Katherine Jackson. They tracked her down. They brought her to Berea. They started the Katherine Jackson French collection. One of her songs went into Gladys Jameson's Wake and Sing. And that same song was part of Wilderness Road. In fact, it was that first ballad I sang to you became part of Wilderness Road, the outdoor extravaganza, the play that was written in honor of the Berea Centennial. Jackson had an amazing act too. She moved south. She moved to Shreveport, Louisiana with her husband. She founded the Women's Department Club of Shreveport, which basically provided a college-level education to the women of Shreveport without the degree, but for free or for a nominal fee. Jackson taught there for 17 years. She also taught at Centenary College. She became the president of the Louisiana American Association of University Women and shepherded it through World War II. And she continued coming home to London, Kentucky in the summer. She kept her Kentucky roots. When she died, tributes poured in from Shreveport. Books were placed in libraries in her honor. And it was quite a thing. Katherine Jackson was laid to rest in London, Kentucky, about a mile away from where she grew up. And the family gathered one last time in her beloved London and laid her to rest, as I said, less than a mile from the house where she grew up. And I'll read you just the very end of the book about the end of her life. The opening page of the service book for French's funeral reads, "If life is sacred, it should not be allowed to perish. We are not dead until we are forgotten." Sadly, Katherine Jackson French has indeed been forgotten. Traces of her are impossible to find in her birthplace. No one there remembers any mention of her. Only a few echoes linger in Shreveport. There is no mention of her at Centenary College, no statue, no plaque, no marker. There are no markers to her at the Shreveport First Methodist Church, though she taught Sunday school there for 31 years. Streets bear the names of other founders of the Women's Department Club, but the only monument to her is the lonely plaque that hangs in the back of the auditorium of the Shreveport Women's Department Club, thanking her for sharing her gifts and changing the lives of thousands of women. This remarkable pioneer, the first collector, male or female, to attempt to publish a large scholarly collection of Southern Appalachian ballads, a mover and shaker in the Louisiana AAUW, the co-founder of the Shreveport Women's Department Club, a beloved professor at Centenary College, and a proud daughter of London, Kentucky, has been consigned to obscurity by the passing of years and a seemingly willful ignorance on the part of her time and ours regarding the accomplishments of such women. That her feats have largely been ignored or forgotten make them no less glorious. She was a giant, and like many other forgotten giants, she paved the way for other women who followed, breaking down walls that might still be in place without her efforts. Indeed, honor is her due, and hers is a name worthy of remembrance. Thank you.
Thank you. I so enjoyed you playing those instruments for us. I've never seen a gourd banjo before. That's really cool. But no, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. We do had to have a couple of folks who shared some comments and questions. So I will go ahead and share those with you. And those of you, if you do have additional questions, folks, please feel free to pop those up in the chat. And let's see here. That opened up. There we go. So we had several folks who commented as you were singing that it was stunning and breathtaking. So, Kathy really appreciated you talking about how she was open to the influence of folks just besides just white men singing ballads. But Mr. Brammer wanted to know, do you think some stereotypes of Appalachia may have been shattered if Jackson's collection had been published in 1910? And also, what did you think of the movie Songcatcher?
Okay, I'll take the first one first. Would they have been shattered? I think that there would have been a different voice in the mix. I think that her stressing of women would have been important. I want to also point out, Sharp called his collection English folk songs from the Southern Appalachians. Jackson called hers English Scottish ballads from the hills of Kentucky. Now, this gets complicated, but let's point out first that Anglo-Saxons and Scots are not the same. Okay, they do. If you want to be punched in the nose, call a Scot an Anglo-Saxon, and then get up and tell me how that went for you. So Anglo-Saxons and Scots are not the same. And so right there in the title, you've got a difference. It gets more complicated because when we get to the early 20th century, people were using the word Anglo-Saxon for anybody who was white European, because they were using it so that they could have a club with which to discriminate against African Americans in particular, and also against the, quote, hyphenated populations pouring into our cities. Thank you, Josiah Combs. People like my grandfather. And so that's part of the reason that this whole fixation with white music came about, which is really uncomfortable for me because I love this music. And I grew up singing this music far away from here and thinking of this as, the defining music of our culture. But when you find out some of the reasons that it became the defining music of our culture, it becomes challenging, So that's the first part of the question. Yeah, I think so. There are other like little hints also sprinkled through Jackson's work. In a piece she wrote later, she talks about how at Sister Marthy's, two boys were playing the banjo fiddlesticks style, which is usually done on fiddle, that's why it's called fiddlesticks. One person holds the instrument and fingers, and the other uses knitting needles to hit the strings. That's fiddlesticks. And that's a style that originated as, I tried tracking that down. Apparently it comes from the Caribbean. All right, so what's this style doing in the hills of Kentucky? There's a story there, there has to, how did it get there? How did these boys learn this? Where'd it come from? Did they just think of it themselves? I mean, they could have, I guess, but it is definitely a style that was happening in the Caribbean and was definitely imported to the United States. So there are hints of other cultures in Jackson's collection. And in particular, I'll say again, I mean, she herself was half Scottish. She was a McKee, so she knew the difference between an Anglo-Saxon and a Scot. So that's the first thing. And what did I think of the movie Songcatcher? I love the movie Songcatcher. I show it to my Appalachian music class every year. Strangely, the story seems to be more aligned with Katherine Jackson than with Olive Dame Campbell, who was married and devoutly, devoted to her husband, John C. Campbell, and there was no affair with Olive Dame Campbell. I mean, there were certainly flights of fancy, I think, in the movie. But I think it's a beautiful movie. I think it has some amazing music. I think it's a good way of introducing people to the subject of Appalachian balladry. But I think it's also good to point out the inaccuracies in the movie, like, Olive Dame Campbell didn't haul recording equipment, neither did Cecil Sharp into the mountains. That's a fabrication that came later. But I think it's a beautiful movie. In fact, Muse Watson lives in town. He's the guy who played the fiddle player when Pretty Sarah is being sung by Iris DeMent on the front porch. And he very graciously one day was just hanging around waiting for his daughter to finish a piano lesson. And he came in and he talked to the class about the making of Songcatcher and the making of that scene. And he said he didn't really play, he was faking it. And Iris DeMent, when it was over, said, "How can you do that?" And he said, "Do what?" And she said, "You're looking at me like you've loved me for 20 years. And he said, "Well, I have, or my character has." Which is a story I loved.
Thank you. So Deborah wanted to know, did Katherine Jackson French collect other songs besides ballads?
Not as far as I could see. She did notate Sourwood Mountain. That's the only tune that she notated. But she didn't collect other songs. Her, she intermittently kind of half-heartedly kept adding to her collection, I think, because she refers to it in her letters, though I couldn't find those songs, but she refers to it. And she did not collect other songs as far as I can see, no.
Kathy said, thank you for bringing her back to life for all of us. And Claire said, this was so interesting, Elizabeth. Thank you, especially for singing for us. And Jessica wanted to, said, can you speak to the song Down in the Willow, and other murder ballads.
Murder ballads. Well, I will tell you there's a wonderful book by Richard Underwood called Crime Songs, The True Story of Appalachian Murder Ballads. Richard is a law professor, and he decided he wanted to go back and see which of these ballads were based on true stories. Large number of them were, especially the ones about murdering young girls. Omi Wise, for example, that's a true story, although the ballad goes astray from facts, and he talks about that. So it's a great book. I recommend it, Crime Songs by Richard Underwood. And yeah, a lot of the Appalachian murder ballads were based on true cases. It was a way of commemorating those young women who had been murdered. I think women sang them for their daughters as a means of warning them not to go off with strange men, or as Deborah Thompson once said, never go down to the river with someone named Sweet Willie or Sweet William. That's just a good general rule of thumb.
Wow. Jody asked, were all ballads unisex, or was there any differentiation between who sung them?
Great question. As far as I can see, no. The singer was a vessel. The singer was a way of keeping the song alive and passing the tradition on, and was also a way of just kind of something to do. Most of the time in ballads, it's either, the story is always told from the third person in these ballads, all the way until you get up to about I would say probably the 1850s or so in Appalachia. Then we get into some first person ballads, especially the jailhouse ballads, where they're Callahan confession type of ballads, I'm a poor boy, I'm about to die kind of ballads. But for the most part, these older ballads are all in the third person. The only time it's in the first person is when you're singing quotes. So there was really no reason to differentiate between who sang them, I think.
Jody also asked, can you briefly describe the line between variants and entirely different ballads?
Mm-hmm. A variant means it's very clearly the same song because the lyrics are almost entirely identical, but the tune is different. Or even that the lyrics are telling the same story, and so it's clearly the same story, but they've changed the way it's been presented, So for example, in Scarlet Town where I was born, there was a fair maid dwelling, and every youth cried well a day. Her name was Barbara Allen, would be one variant of Barbara Allen. Another would be, 'twas in the merry month of May, where the green buds they were swelling. Young William Green on his deathbed lay, for the love of Barbara Allen. It's another version of the same song.
Well, and now we talked briefly just about the recordings that you've done of these ballads. Where can we get, because I would like to hear more, so where can I get that?
Sure. Well, you can get that from me. I can put in the chat the easiest email to remember, which is liza.disavino@gmail.com. If you forget that, you can always look me up at Berea College. I guarantee you I'm the only DiSavino at Berea. The book can be gotten online, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, University Press of Kentucky. If you order it from them, then that's probably better because then they get all the money.
We may have some copies of that in the KHS gift shop as well. I think we should.
Oh, well, there you go.
And Jessica says we should get some CDs too.
Okay, definitely, I'd be glad to. CD is entitled "There Was a Fair Maid Dwellin'." It's kind of hard to not get the shine messed up. But the Ballads of Katherine Jackson French.
Cool.
And it's a 2-disc set, and that you can get from me. And also, this just happened, and I am so thrilled. The third and final leg of this project, which has taken me over 7 years to complete, the publication of the Ballads of Katherine Jackson French by Berea College, in fulfillment of our 110-year-old promise. So this is courtesy of the Loyal Jones Appalachian Center. Thank you, Chris Green, for the support. And I am so thrilled. She said she wanted it in a booklet, prettily bound with an Elizabethan frontispiece. So we have done our best.
I'm sure she would be very, very happy with that. Very nice. Well, we should get that for the gift shop too. That looks great.
Absolutely.
I think I missed one comment. Let's see, I'm going to try to scroll back here. Stephanie said, oh, where did it go? There it goes. Stephanie says, I totally agree with your assessment of Cecil Sharp's approach. I call them his English blinders, and it was true of his approach to dance, that is the running set. Indeed, many of the versions of ballads in Appalachia are clearly from lowland Scotland, which had a rich singing tradition. Thank you for your insights.
Yeah, I'm sure you've read the Phil Jameson book where he talks about finding dance moves here that were not in English dancing. So he said, well, see, that's proof that they're older because they disappeared in England, but they're still here. That must be the answer. It couldn't have just like happened here or been borrowed from another culture or, you know, no, it had to be Elizabethan Englishmen, by golly, by Jove, by George.
And Jody says, but what about Irish ballads?
Okay. That's another story. Ireland has its own rich ballad traditions. There are really two ballad traditions, that in the South, that in the North. The North tends to have a lot better choruses and they tend to be songs in English because that's a mix of cultures. You know, that's a point where the cultures come up against each other and mix and blend and fuss and fight. And music of Northern Ireland is its own creature. But the thing is, the people who came to Appalachia were predominantly the what we came to call Scots-Irish, Ulster Scots. In other words, people who moved from Scotland to Northern Ireland, from there mostly to Pennsylvania, and then down the spine of Appalachia on the Great Wagon Road, and the English who had already settled the coast and then moved west because of things like the Head Right Act and other things that encouraged people to move west. So it was really a mix of those two people, but predominantly Scots-Irish, Northern Irish. Not really, I mean, the Southern Irish, there were some who came to work in the mines, but that was later. And the traditions were pretty well established by that time. So they certainly were here. They certainly had music. Honestly, I think that the peoples who came to work in the mines, that's become a point of interest for me as someone who's half Italian. And in fact, I'm working on uncovering the stories of the Italians and Hungarians and their culture, the people who came to work in the mines from the 1880s through about the 1930s. In fact, Deborah Thompson and Kathy Bullock were all working on a project together about basically about cultural erasure in Appalachian music. You know, we hear a lot about the rural white people and their music, but what about the African Americans? What about the Native Americans? What about the Italians and the Hungarians who came to work in the mine? What about the women? What about the recent arrivals? You know, the Latino and Latina people who have come. You know, what about LGBTQ people who have never really been represented? What are those stories? What are those musics? You know, so we're kind of we're just starting our project and we're all really excited about it.
I'm excited about it too now. Let me just go ahead and say we want you to come and talk and perform and all that kind of stuff at KHS. So we want to know more about that. Rebecca said, what a great way to start the month of May. She's pretty excited. And Jessica says this has been an incredible presentation. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
It has been wonderful to have you with us today. Thank you. It's just so cool that you have all those instruments right behind you. You keep switching off. I'm just amazed by that. Joetta, I was delayed. We're coming to the recording. Joetta was delayed getting to the meeting and wondered if the recording will be available. Yes, Joetta, we will make a recording available for you. And Deborah says, all in the merry month of May when green buds all were swelling. All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for being with us today. Do remember to join us next month for the first Friday in June. Our guest will be Dr. Aaliyah Henley from Miami University of Ohio. And she's just recently published a book about early historical societies in the United States, including the Kentucky Historical Society, founded in 1836. So we're excited to learn more about that period. All right, so we will go ahead and end for today. Hope everybody has a fantastic weekend. Oh, and there's lizaandaj.com. One more thing. So
you can actually order the album there. That it's set up to if you want a digital download, you can order there. If you want a hard copy, then you can write to me and we can do it that way. Anyway,
okay.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a great time.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Bye, everybody. Liza, are you and AJ going to be playing some now that COVID is starting to?
Yes. Yes, indeed. I mean, we have a virtual festival this summer, but then in the fall, we're going to be playing at the Nile Center on September 17th.
Okay, awesome.
That's our first real gig.
Wow. Oh my gosh, that's awesome. And now tell me, where's the Nile Center? It's
John Jacob Nile Center, University of Kentucky campus.
Oh, it's okay. So it's just in Lexington. I had farther out east in my head. Okay, cool. All right. Well, we'll have to check that one out. All right. Well, I'll go ahead and end it for us. Thank you guys. Have a great day.